Hello, it's Tuesday morning, and we are hanging out with Joti Brar. We are going to talk about the potential of new parties, and possibly we'll get to Iran. We'll get to the NATO summit. We got a lot to talk about. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with Joti Brar, and we haven't had Joti on in a while. She's been busy doing really fine work. I understand she was at the NATO summit preaching the good word of anti-imperialism, saw her on neutrality studies, absolute brilliant job as always. And now we're fortunate enough to have Joti back with us. Joti, tell everybody where they can find you online.
Well, thank you, Garland. So online, if you go to thecommunists.org, that's our party's website, you can find our channel and my channel, Joti Brar and the Communists, are both on Telegram. Our YouTube channel is Proletarian TV, at Prol TV. One of the things since you asked me, one of the things we're trying to persuade people to do more of these days is to subscribe physically to our newspaper. Here it is. Here's the latest one. Really, if you want to get serious analysis from a Marxist perspective, you can't do better than hold it in your hands. It goes into your head and you learn from it in a way that you just don't off the interwebs. Internet is a great way to access our content. Of course, it is all online, but it's not the same. So we're really encouraging people to take out subscriptions to the paper and have a physical contact with this really important way of looking at the world.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, here's something I wanted to get your perspective on. So, as it becomes glaringly obvious that the ruling elite and their representatives in number 10 Downing in Brussels and 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, as their puppets and avatars there become less credible. As the deterioration of the lifestyle of the working class continues unabated, it seems to me that they're starting to recognize that the jig is up, as they say. The game is out, that the whole thing is a fraud. So along comes the richest man in the world, supposedly one of the richest men in the world, at least, no doubt. Elon Musk, he's going to start a new party. Boy, that's great. The richest guy in the world is going to start a party. A man who, let's see, when they overthrew when the government overthrew Evo Morales in Bolivia, he tweeted, "We coup who we want." We. So I guess he's not we anymore. I guess he's going to start something new. Meanwhile, I understand that some people from the great Labor Party, who does such a bang-up job fighting anti-Semitism, they've had some schleps there who've decided, yes, we're going to start something different from Keir Starmer and we'll go in a totally new direction. What's up with these so-called new parties? Your thoughts on and simultaneously too, coincidentally, both the UK and the US are both starting new parties to take us in a different direction. Joti Brar.
Thanks, Garland. It's an excellent question. And you're right to notice it's a trend on the right and the left, so say, of bourgeois politics, right? Because what's happened is the official right and the official left everywhere, as you already said in your question, are increasingly discredited and in fact hated by huge masses of the people who formerly felt vested in the system and formerly would have voted for them. Fundamentally, for the illusion of bourgeois democracy to work, enough people have to vote for it to look like, it really is the voice of the people that's speaking. And they have to vote for the parties that the ruling class wants them to vote for. And the ruling class will put a choice in front of you and brand them differently. But fundamentally, you're actually voting for the same thing. Now, the problem is, with the last 40 years of attacks on workers' pay, conditions, social benefits, public services, infrastructure, export of what was left of, in Britain, we didn't have much industry left, but what there was left of it has been also exported. In America, you've had this, or the USA, you've had this massive exodus of what was a pretty good industrial base, 4 decades ago, now is looking a lot more like Britain's, which is nearly non-existent. I think you've got still more intact than we do, because our ruling class started the process of offshoring, exporting capital, exporting production to maximize profits a long, long time ago. So in Britain, really what looked like a recent phenomenon is actually something that's been slowly happening for like over a century. But anyway, so you put all of these things together, working people have found, as you said, decent jobs have disappeared, decent pay and conditions in general have disappeared. Everything's becoming homogenized down. So what jobs are available to most people now, no matter what the job is, are almost all on minimum wage. And to get anything even slightly above minimum wage, you've got to pay to have a degree to do almost anything, and you have to be in debt. And that takes you slightly above minimum wage, not that much above it, to be perfectly frank. And if you want a proper job that gives you a livable salary, you actually have to come from a family now, in Britain certainly, that has paid for you to have a private education. That's the only way into a job that gives you a salary that gives you a decent life. So the privileged section of the working class has become much, much smaller. The mass are being pushed down into poverty, and the poor are being utterly immiserated. We have a huge poverty crisis in Britain. And all of this has been going on under the watch of the mainstream political parties. And where previously people felt that, who you votes for changes how things are, this was always a lie, but it was sold to us on the basis that our life was quite good. So it sort of looked like it might be true. But as life has got worse and things have got worse for workers, and they have felt attacked and under pressure, what they've found is voting out one government and voting in one that promised to change things got them exactly the same. And so not surprisingly, there's a huge crisis, not just of credibility for the mainstream parties, but of legitimacy for the whole flipping system. People are increasingly saying to each other, what's the point in voting? Doesn't matter who you vote for, you get the same result. Politicians, they say politicians, they mean bourgeois politicians, but they don't know that's what they mean. Politicians are all the same. They're in it for themselves. They take care of the rich. They don't care about us. They leave us in the shit. And all these things are an accurate reflection of their experiences and what's been happening to them for a long time. What's not fully understood by people, of course, is that this is not to do with politics, so say. It's to do with the operations of the ruling class in an exploitative system. It's to do with capitalism, and in our case, to do with imperialism and how that works economically, who the ruling class really is, how they operate, how they keep control over society. The fact that we have a society that's divided into two, as Marx put it, two great hostile camps. And increasingly, it's one huge camp and one tiny camp. But they feel like two great camps because the tiny camp has so much wealth. And with that wealth, they can create a machinery of power. And they can bribe a whole layer of workers to run that machinery of power. So they have a kind of Mandarin class that is their like executive that operates the system. And then they have a kind of the army and navy and police and all that, the judiciary and this class of people that, is paid to enforce their rule, actually, and keep everybody else in their place as wage slaves. So it's not fully understood by people that it's the class system of exploitation, of capitalist production for profit, that is what is creating these conditions. But they have actually understood that these politicians are all the same. They haven't really understood why that is. And this is something the ruling class is really banking on. So they see that people are angry. They see that the credibility is going. What they want to do is kick the can down the road for a little bit longer, try and maintain a level of social stability for a little bit longer, try and postpone the rising of a revolutionary current, which is definitely simmering underneath, even in quite an inchoate way, it's simmering away underneath, right? So they're trying to postpone the evil day when the pitchforks come out, right? And the masses recognize who their real enemies are and start to do something about it in an organized and collective way, what they do is they play on the fact that there isn't a really strong class conscious leadership in most countries, and particularly in the imperialist countries. It's basically been destroyed after World War II. So we don't have a strong, well-known class conscious leadership that workers identify their interests as a class. We have a general sense that this is what there is, capitalism, this way of doing things, what they call democracy, by which they mean actually capitalist democracy, which is democracy for the rich. This bourgeois democracy is presented to us as the be-all and end-all and the only civilized way of doing things, etc. And they're playing on our prejudice that is basically true, and our still kind of bottom level faith that there's a way to fix things without changing the system. And that faith is actually, at this point, for a lot of people, it's not even a fundamental belief the way it used to be. It's like a hope. People are tired, they feel a bit broken. Like the idea of actually it's on us to organize and educate ourselves and work out what the problems are and how we change them and really implement that understanding in a mass way. That's a big job. It's hard. It involves us taking responsibility and not leaving it to somebody else. People want it to be fixed by someone else coming along. They want it to be true that there's a savior who'll come and rescue us. It isn't true. We're going to have to get ourselves organized. But in the meantime, this hope, this desire for change, and this hope that it can be delivered through turning up and giving your vote to somebody, even like at a push, I'll come out and knock on doors for you at election time, right? That's like a level of activism I can just about cope with, right? That's where a lot of people are. They want it to be true that we can fix our problems with a vote and a change in policy and a change of personnel. And the ruling class is banking on the fact that there are still enough people who feel that way, that creating more parties on the left and on the right, depending on the branding that works best for those individuals. And remember, we're being constantly pummeled with culture wars propaganda to make us identify as left or right on the bourgeois spectrum, right? So in Britain right now, we already got the new right party. It's Reform, headed up by Nigel Farage. And it's basically that pushes the immigrants are the reason your life is shit. And they push it really, really hard. And they are backed up by a huge media campaign that demonizes immigrants endlessly, day by day, by hour, minute by minute, second by second. And especially, interestingly, I mean, it's bad enough in the mainstream media, but if you're a poor and angry worker who's starting to become a bit cynical about the mainstream media, and you've started to cotton on to the fact that mainstream media lies to you, you will take yourself off the BBC and off ITV and Channel 4. And what will you do? You'll turn on some kind of talk radio, GB News. And what does that do? That basically ramps up the anti-immigrant propaganda to, as the Spinal Tap dude said, to 11. Right? It's one louder. I mean, it's like really, really like non-stop, wall to wall. You can't get away from the received wisdom that the reason things are in the shit for everybody is something to do with these immigrants, right? And so that's the right wing answer, and they're pushing that really hard. And as I say, because the mainstream right parties are losing credibility, they put a new one that's more to the right. I mean, if you look at our politics generally, in terms of what we all understood by left and right, the whole thing has been shifting to the right endlessly since World War II. And now, the people who call themselves left are what used to be considered probably centre-right. Yeah. And everything else is right of that. So all these terms become pretty flipping meaningless, but it shows you, the state of capitalism, how it needs to preach hatred to keep itself going now that it's delivering so little to the masses, right? Even in a rich country like Britain, capitalism in crisis, imperialism in crisis is taking away the bribe it used to pay to workers. It's delivering so little to the masses. They're under so much pressure and stress that only divide deepening and deepening the divides between the workers and putting them at each other's throats is going to enable the capitalists to kind of stay on top and stay in charge. And even then, it's quite a bumpy ride now. So they're setting up these right-wing parties that focus totally on the race baiting. And then, of course, there's as we've got over here, the new Jeremy Corbyn plan to, be on the left and be against the genocide. And, so it's a new bit of branding, right? There's a whole load of people who are starting to realize, and our party's really highlighted this, starting to realize that the Labour Party is as much a part of the problem as the Tories when it comes to, not just everything about ordinary day-to-day life, but when it comes to imperialism and war. There's a bunch of people who've started to realize through having to watch, in real time for more than a year and a half, the genocidal activity of the Zionist entity on Palestine. And they have started to realize that the Labour Party is in it up to its, over its head, in fact, not even up to its neck, is totally complicit, has always been complicit, and that Zionism is something to do with imperialism, and that the British state is like connected to all that. There's starting to be this real awakening amongst a kind of core section of the Palestine solidarity movement, that this is not just a question of niceness v nastiness. It's not just a question of one random individual somewhere in the world doing bad things. There's a connection between those horrific scenes we're witnessing and our own ruling class. And the reason our governments don't criticize or stand up to or enact anything that will sever British support for that is because our ruling class is actually a puppet master for what's going on over there. They're not a disinterested bystander saying, oh dear, what a shame. Wouldn't it be nice if what do they say, Jews and Muslims could get along? All the crap. Wouldn't it be nice if we could have two states living in harmony? I wonder why there's no peace in the Middle East. No, they're realizing the total complicity and the lying. They've been disgusted by the real-time lies told to cover up for these war criminals and to facilitate their crimes, even while they cry crocodile tears in front of us and pretend to care. At the same time, we see them authorizing plane load after plane load, shipment after shipment, and targeting and terrorizing the people who try to stop this crime going on. Right? Literally, you know what happened in Britain just now, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. Palestine Action, a small little group of people who got so frustrated with the fact that there's no organized resistance. The trade union movement's done nothing. Some of the most powerful unions in Britain have either said, well, arms jobs are important and we can't do anything against them, or they've said, it's not a British working class issue, or they've said, they come out with all kind of nonsense to just hide from their complicity, their responsibility to help the working class organize itself to stop the British complicity and facilitation of these crimes, right? So Palestine Action is people like that who desperately wanted this to stop, wanted British involvement to be stopped. And they took matters into their own hands, which you can't blame them for. They are actually upholding international law, which our government is breaking. No one cares about that. And they are being targeted and criminalized to the point where they have now, for your viewers in the USA who may not be aware of this, they have now been proscribed as a terrorist organization. And the kind of last case of them, the kind of thing they do is break into premises that have some connection to, particularly to Elbit, which is Israel's biggest arms manufacturer, right? Directly facilitating genocide right now today. So it's very specifically targeted to wake people up to the fact that Britain is full of buildings and factories and plants and designers and estate agents and all kinds of people who are part of this network of allowing these things to happen, right? And they're specifically targeting those. And what they basically do is they go in and they'll smash up some computers or some equipment and try to interrupt the factory's ability to work or the building's ability to function. And they'll spray it with red paint to symbolize, obviously, the blood of real people are really dying. This is a bit of red paint, right? And interestingly, the most recent, so I've gone on a bit of a tangent, but I'm going to carry on because I think it's
sure, it's important.
There's the most recent case that where they were kind of found guilty of a huge amount of criminal damage, and it was like said to be a kind of national security issue and used as justification for calling Palestine Action a terrorist organization, was that they sprayed paint on, and probably, I don't know, did a bit of smashing too, but what I heard was just they sprayed paint. So I don't know the exact details of the level of the damage, but I think it was just paint. 2 fighter jets at, I think it's Brize Norton Air Base in Britain. And we were told this was like millions of pounds worth of damage, right? But then what we were also told, and doesn't this tell you everything you need to know about how modern imperialist societies work, that those fighter jets actually belong to a hedge fund. And the hedge fund rents them to the RAF, obviously at a big fat profit. So if you want to know why we have to spend so much on war, it's not even just, it's like with the health budget, it's not even just because we're doing more war. It's because the cost of war is ballooning because it has to provide profits to the owners of finance capital, who now own literally everything. Literally everything. Everything has to be milked to make profits for the owners of capital, and they're buying up all the assets because they've got so much capital, you know, and they are milking all of what used to be public services. Even our armies, navies, and air forces are being subcontracted in ways that provide profits to these hedge funds and various private companies. So that was a really interesting kind of angle on the whole story that came out about that. But coming back to the question of credibility, you know, we've got Palestine Action being banned as a terrorist group because they're standing up to this terrible crime that the whole of humanity recognizes and really wants to stop and has been expressing its anger and frustration about. And you've had not just individuals and small organizations, whole countries have been trying to stop it and have been frustrated in their efforts. And all that's really happened is we've seen that the imperialists control all these so-called international mechanisms, and they won't let them be used against themselves. So they're not really international mechanisms at all, are they? And all their talk about the equality of nations and the United Nations and international law turns out to have been a whole lot of hot air. And there's only one language the imperialists understand, and it's the language of force. Okay, so we learned that. But in the meantime, a lot of people who thought that the way to change society was to vote Labour because they were sold to us as the progressive party, the party of equality and liberty and, you know, doing good things for working class people and providing decent public services and all of that. Many people have totally given up on that idea. Now, a huge number of working class people had already given up on it. It's very noticeable that Keir Starmer was manipulated into office. I talked to you about this when the election happened. He was manipulated into office with a lot of gerrymandering and a lot of people not voting. And what ended up happening, in fact, he got this huge, like, mega majority, super majority, they call it, in the House of Commons, which means that, you know, no one could stop Labour passing any legislation they want, essentially, because they've got so many seats in the House of Commons. But they got those seats on the back of just 18% of British adults voted for them, right? Many more people didn't vote for anybody. You know, their numbers, actually, when you look at in the context of the whole adult population of Britain, are shockingly low. And you see how well the ruling class can manipulate the system to make that look like a massive victory, right? But what it actually shows is that the credibility of all these parties is on very thin ice. It already was then, and now it is more so. And it's interesting to see that before the last election, Jeremy Corbyn, who is always continually held up to us as some kind of a savior of the workers and a man of principle, even after he U-turned on every single principle he supposedly held dear while he was in that you know, pinnacle of left hope positions, the leader of the Labour Party, right? So many people for so many decades on the fake left in Britain have been telling the working class, if we can just get a left winger into the leadership of the Labour Party and get them elected to Downing Street, it's like, that's how we'll get socialism, basically. Now, he was the leader of the Labour Party. He got very close to actually being elected. And he came under huge pressure from the media and the political class and the establishment on points of principle that he supposedly held, but which don't fit with what you have to do to be, either the leader of Her Majesty's loyal opposition or the leader of Her Majesty's loyal ministers, right? Either way, there are certain things which are non-negotiable. And one, of course, is the imperialist war machine. And having been officially a lifelong pacifist and a lifelong anti-NATOer, when he was in that position and under pressure and pushed on NATO, he dropped his opposition to NATO. He dropped his opposition to Trident. He dropped his supposedly his opposition on British intervention in Syria and allowed what they called a free vote, which basically meant let the right wing of the party have their way and let them vote for bombing in Syria. He used Brexit, of course, was the big one that really upset lots and lots of workers. He did a massive U-turn on Brexit. And first he campaigned for Remain, which really upset lots of people. But then he at least after the referendum result said it should be respected. And in his first election run in 2017, because he had that position, the referendum result should be respected and implemented, he got a lot of votes. And actually, the majority of workers in Britain would have been quite happy for him to be in number 10. He missed it by a very small margin, which turned out to have been basically created by his own side. And then in the period between that election and the next one, which was only 2 years later, he did a U-turn under pressure and went for we should have a second referendum. And a huge number of workers who had great hope and faith in the program that he seemed to be putting forwards said, forget this man, he's a traitor to us, he won't stand up. And of course, the other thing that he did was totally back down to the Zionist lobby. They came for him to make it clear that Zionism is not optional and to make it clear that the Labour Party can't be a home to people who genuinely support Palestine. And they accused him of supporting terrorism and of being anti-Semitic. Did he stand up for himself and therefore for all the other people who were being targeted? No. What did he do? He apologized and apologized and apologized and apologized and backed off and backed off and backed off. And his closest supporters were hung out to dry under his leadership. Expelled some of them, his very close supporters who were MPs and high public figures who had stood by him for decades. He let them be hung out to dry over charges of anti-Semitism. He let there be a massive witch hunt in the Labour Party for anti-Semites, which basically kicked out everybody who's ever posted something positive about Palestine on the internet. A huge witch hunt. Under his leadership of the Labour Party. This is the great white hope of British socialism that we've been shown to us for all these years, right? So now this is the person we are supposed to have faith in, that somehow, in a different party, he's going to, be in a much better position to stand up for all those things he supposedly represents. No, what we're seeing here is a carefully manipulated attempt to stop those people who are so disenfranchised and disenchanted and angry with what's happening, to stop them from starting to look beyond the bourgeois spectrum, beyond bourgeois elections, beyond just tailing along, behind some great savior, being in a little tribe, supporting your brand of the system and going to the ballot box and hoping like anything that you're going to get the change that, Obama or Corbyn or Trump or Farage or Elon Musk have promised you. And of course, you're not going to get that change if you haven't addressed the systemic issues, which fundamentally, this is all problems created by the system of capitalist production for profit, which has become global and is now the imperialist system of domination, monopoly capitalism, finance capitalism, financial domination and wealth extraction of the globe, which is why a few hedge funds literally own everything.
Well, there's another thing going on. I don't know if you've been paid attention to this. So there's this guy, something Namdani, Koran Mamdani in New York, and he has won. He beat, one of the Cuomo brothers of CNN, former governor of New York, or then their family and all that stuff. And so this guy wins. He calls himself DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. And he says things like, we've got to have the stuff that Bernie would say. And so he's like, he's opposed to genocide or whatever. And he says, no, that's bad. Okay. So all these people freak out. Yes, this shows something great. So he won the nomination, and I think now he's going to go against the Republican. A lot of people think he's going to win, but they're all, yes, this shows that, this is great. This guy's a Muslim. He opposes the genocide. And my first position on this, that's like a minimum requirement. To say that somebody opposes genocide, therefore we should support him, is like saying, I don't know, he's a human being, therefore he's electable. If you support genocide, if you oppose genocide, that's not like something we should cheer about. That's like, okay, well, that's a minimum required. If you don't support genocide, there's no way I can even think about you. But the other thing is this. So all of these people in the US are like, yes, the Democratic Party has to be scared. He's the new direction the Democratic Party was going. And so all of these so-called lefties in the United States are all, yes, he opposes genocide and he's for all of these good things and free bus fare and things like that. And I'm thinking to myself, Democratic Socialists of America, Bernie Sanders is DSA, AOC's DSA. These people come in and they pretend that there's a left flank of the Democratic Party. They pretend that there's part of the left flank. And as soon as they're needed, they join forces with the imperialists, with the warmongers, with the people who are totally, beholden to the ruling elite. And it's almost like, to me, and oh, by the way, this guy's wife, she's a Syrian artist, but it's a very kind of hard to find her history, but when you do find her history, you find that she was one of these anti-Assad Syrians. Always kind of leads me back to MI6 and CIA when I find these anti-Assad Syrians, like these North Koreans that escaped across the border and now they're activists against North Korea. They always find a traitor, Juan Guaido or somebody. I guess Juan Guaido will be running for New York mayor next, so to me, these people who are the next iteration of some kind of a left that's going to save us, that the system now, they can still operate within this crooked system or these crooked parties, but somehow they're going to take us in a new direction. I don't trust that stuff. And I'm not one of the people that are like, hey, Zoran, I'm like, I don't trust it. Do you think I'm being a little bit too overly cautious, skeptical? What are your thoughts, Jody?
I'm with you, Garland. I think you put it really well. It's interesting. I was having a conversation with some party members last night about this new Corbyn thing. And one of them said, I'm starting to feel like Corbyn is a state asset. And then we were discussing, ultimately, does it matter?
Exactly.
He could be genuinely what he's been promoted to us as a nice guy who makes jam, or he could be a conscious MI6 asset. But the point is the outcome is the same. And Lenin made a very important observation. I'm going to mangle the quote because I don't remember it exactly, but he made a very important observation in one of his works where he said, in politics, where the fate of millions rests on outcomes, your intention is irrelevant. It's the outcome of what you do that matters. And if the outcome of your action is detrimental to the cause of the working class, you're a traitor to the working class. You're an enemy of the working class. It doesn't matter if you meant well. It's irrelevant because on the outcome of your actions rests the fate of millions. Well, that is absolutely correct. Fundamentally, they're acting like state assets, whether they are or not. If the state's getting it for free, lucky old state. But the reality is that this very much fits with what the ruling class needs to happen right now. And you look at the timing, Jeremy Corbyn was being begged by the people who consider him to somehow be the savior of the left. I don't know why they still have these delusions, but they do. And it's been very much encouraged to have this kind of, fandom mentality towards this quite uninteresting, quite boring, quite untalented man. I don't know what the allure is, but anyway, there is this big allure and this big attraction, and there's this kind of core fan base that were desperate for him to start a new party before the last election, and he kind of tinkered around with kind of vaguely promising that he might sort of think about something, and there was a peace and justice thing going on that just didn't turn into anything. And fundamentally, he wasn't going to scupper Labour at the last election. Labour that was already engaged in supporting and facilitating the genocide even before they were elected, right? His Palestine solidarity doesn't go so far as to want to scupper the Labour Party that kicked him out over false allegations of anti-Semitism that you know, well, that wasn't why he got kicked out, but you know,
yeah, right. But
that was how they kind of drubbed him initially. His supposed Palestine solidarity doesn't go as far as wanting to expose the Labour Party's complicity in a genocide during the time of a general election when people might be watching and listening. Right? That's how much he cares about Palestine. He cares about Palestine so much that he is still going around talking about the two-state solution. Now, back in 1993, or whenever the Oslo Accords were signed, when not all, but the majority of PLO, Palestinian organizations, signed up to that deal, not because it was a good outcome or a final outcome, but because with the global and local balance of forces as they were at that time, if what had been signed up to in the Accords had been stuck to, they were prepared to make this titanic compromise and sacrifice 73% of their historic homeland in order to have some peace for their people and some rights for their people. It was never respected. Israel and Israel's backers in the USA and Britain never allowed it to be implemented or respected. Not only is the two-state solution completely dead in the water, but also the full character of the genocidal Zionist entity has been revealed to people. And this is not a new thing. It's now clear that the way we have seen Israel present itself, the Israeli people, the Israeli soldiers present themselves on our social media feeds in the last 2 years is not new. That was the way they were always talking to each other in Hebrew, but it wasn't what was presented to us in English to the rest of the world, right? Well, now we know. So what kind of person can now say that a viable solution to the problems in the Middle East include the existence of any kind of ethnic supremacist Zionist entity? Clearly, it is the problem. Its very existence is the problem. This settler colonial supremacist, fascist outpost is a dagger at the heart of all of the peoples of the region. And while it persists, those people will never have liberation. They'll never have freedom. They'll never have the peace. They'll never have the ability to use their resources as they see fit. They'll never have sovereignty. They'll never have development. They've got all these riches, but the riches are being taken elsewhere. And Israel is part of the machinery that ensures that the riches of the Middle East end up outside the Middle East and not in the Middle East, developing the Middle East for the Middle Eastern people. So I'm just saying all this to point out that this so-called great principle of Jeremy Corbyn's to be against the genocide and in favor of Palestine doesn't go as far as an actual viable solution and real justice for Palestinian people. It's all empty words. At this point in time, after everything we've seen about what Zionism means, to still talk as if there's room in the world, in the future, in a peaceful, hypothetical peaceful future under capitalism and imperialism, which we're apparently not allowed to talk about, there's some path towards a peace in the Middle East that involves Israel existing as a Zionist supremacist ethno-state, is absolute nonsense. And actually, it's a total betrayal of everything the Palestinian people have suffered in the last 2 years and in the last 70 years, in the last 100 years, which is becoming clearer and clearer and clearer to more and more people around the world. And Jeremy Corbyn comes up and says, oh, well, it will be a really good idea if the killing stops and we have peace talks and a two-state solution. It's like, what? What are you talking about? So, I think that the job of these people, as you said, Garland, like with your Democratic Socialists of America guy, they really play the role, and again, I'm quoting, I'm afraid, from Marx, of the constantly outvoted minority. You know, they're there to present a fig leaf. Everybody knows they're going to be outvoted. So they can say the thing that makes a few people happy and keeps a few people on board, that the system's working and we've got democracy and, oh, there's a way to get socialist change through this party. And when it really comes to it, when push comes to shove, they will U-turn. But more than that, you pointed to it earlier about the DSA. What is their position on China? What's their position on Russia? What's their position on Iran? What's their position on Syria? I think you'll find, if you look into it, that it's with imperialism all the way. They will be pushing Sinophobia. They'll be pushing Russophobia. They'll be blaming Putin for, you know, Russian imperialist aggression. They will be amplifying all of these narratives. They're basically, you know, left cover tools for imperialism. They are not the solution to anybody's problem. And, you know, you can tell that pretty much by the fact that what they're focused on is getting people elected in the Democratic Party. Well, that in itself tells you that they're not trying to fundamentally change anything.
Let me read. Look, this is AOC, you know, the so-called socialist. This is her pinned tweet. The cynics will tell you that one vote won't change anything. But what they don't tell you is that nothing can change without a vote. The truth is, the world doesn't belong to the cynics. It's up to us. So there you go. There's AOC. Look, it may seem like that you're voting for us and you get nothing out of it. Fair enough. But the truth is, and then she just really doesn't say anything. Nothing can change without a vote, blah, blah. The truth is what? You like start off with something and then go nowhere. And I'm like, I don't even know what the hell that means. I mean, let me just say this. What they don't tell you is nothing can change without a vote. Okay, so what she's saying is if you don't vote, there's no hope. Your only hope is in voting. And that's the person. So the people who voted for Obama, remember this, hope and change. Great. I didn't even know what that means, but he said hope and change. And so we can project whatever we wanted to it. I guess it means good stuff. Voted for him, 7 wars, neoliberalism, bail out the banks. In comes Donald Trump with MAGA. Vote for me. We're going to make America great again. And he literally said no more forever wars. He literally said, I'm going to get the Epstein files out. And now we learn recently, they released something. Epstein did, in fact, kill himself. And there are no Epstein files. Interesting. That's what they said. Did you hear that? The DOJ, Trump said, oh, they're on my desk. I'm going to release them. And now the FBI, the DOJ released a thing that says, number one, we're sure that Epstein killed himself. And number two, there are no Epstein files to release.
Oh, well, that's solved then, Garland.
Yeah. Well, see, good thing it took them a long time to figure out there were no Epstein, to promise to release them. And then all of a sudden to figure out that, well, we can't release them. Why? Because we don't have anything to release. Anyway, my point being, they're running out of lies. Hey, if you do this, this will work. You know, it's like somebody goes to a doctor and their leg hurts and the doctor says, take this pill. That doesn't hurt. Okay, take that pill. That doesn't help. Wiggle your hand this way twice a day. That doesn't work. And after a while, they run out of things to tell you, because no matter what happens, you find out this, that doctor can't help me. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing. You know, and you start to question Western medicine after a while. But my point being, I don't even know what my point was. What difference does it make? I'm lost. But let's go on to something important.
Can I just add to that?
Sure, go ahead.
I think I know what your point was.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to come back to it, which is, well, it might not be exactly what your point was, but it felt like what you were skirting around the edge of, which is with this whole discussion about your vote and your vote counts, there's like two things that are left out. One is the first lie is that voting will fundamentally change the policy of the ruling class. Well, it won't, because all the parties that you're able to vote for represent policies that are dictated by the ruling class, right? So they serve the ruling class. So that's the first lie. Second lie is that the people you're voting for are decision makers in the first place. But they're not, are they? We increasingly see they are clowns. They are a distraction. The whole parliamentary show, the whole, you know, what you have the Senate and the Congress, the whole of that bourgeois parliamentary show is a show. It's a circus. It's a sideshow, a distraction to make you look over here and not quite realize that the people who make the decisions are in a different place. And they're a different set of people, and you don't get to be in on their discussions. And they are sending instructions to these guys about what policies to sell. Brian Baletic puts it very nicely, actually, on his shows, that, you know, you have this monopoly financier class, which works out what its plans are going to be through think tanks and policy papers and its various kind of connections, and the various kind of professionals it pays to kind of brainstorm things out for them. And they reach their kind of consensus in various ways, the top super rich. And then they have a whole machine that kicks in. In America, it works this way, I know, but I'm sure in Britain it's basically the same thing. This whole machinery kicks in of lobby groups and, you know, a whole layer of organizations whose job is to make sure that the parliamentarians know that they have to back this thing. And then the parliament is the kind of rubber stamp on it, and everybody's getting their kickback for playing their part in the procedure. But basically, the policy is decided over here and comes down in a line, and a bunch of people get paid to make sure that at this end, where the parliamentary debate happens, it looks like something is going on to do with decision making. But actually, these people are playing the part they've been prepped to play. They're giving lines they've been given by the policy writers and the pressure groups and the lobby groups, whatever. They've been giving their script, and they're well paid for standing over here and doing that. So, you know, you can elect someone into number 10 and they could be a brilliant person, but their hands aren't on the levers of power. They could say anything, they could do anything. So what? So you've got, you know, like with Jeremy Corbyn, I was saying there's two problems. One is, you could put, my dad used to say this, you could put Karl Marx as the leader of the Labour Party. He couldn't change the fact that it's an imperialist party.
Right.
And, you know, he could have all the right ideas and know all the right things, and the people could put all their faith in him. He couldn't change the fact that that's what kind of party it is. It's become absolutely a part of the state machinery of Britain, and its job is the control of the working class, not delivery on a programme that fulfills their interests. And then the second thing is, like I say, you put somebody into 10 Downing Street in our case, or whatever the number is, Pennsylvania Avenue in your case, and so what? That's not where things are decided. So at every level, we're being hoodwinked, aren't we? And this whole thing of keeping this machine going, trying to keep our faith in that machine going, trying to rehash the idea. Okay, so you fell for it with Obama, and then you fell for it with Trump. I fell for it with Corbyn. Now you're falling for it with Farage. You know, but now you've realized that these people haven't delivered for you. And what are you going to do? You know, so in Britain, we've got now Corbyn or Farage, pick your brand of, you know, savior who's going to shake everything up for you, just like you had Donald Trump in the last election. Well, now they're giving you a whole new, you've got Musk on one side and you've got your DSA guy on the other side. Again, pick your poison. But the whole point is to play the same bloody trick again. Like, how many times are we going to let ourselves, at what point do we take responsibility and stop saying, oh, these bastards lied to us, and start saying, we are letting ourselves be hoodwinked with the same damn trick, round and round and round. And, you know, it's no wonder the ruling class despises us when we let ourselves be treated like absolute morons.
I agree. The other thing, last thing on this subject, and that is something I've kind of figured out through a number of things. And that is, if I was just looking over AOC's timeline, and she says, they're stealing it all and giving us crumbs, right? So the so-called left, this phony, fake DSA lefties in America, here's the way they kind of say, the problem is we're not getting our fair share. Right? That's it. You're not getting your fair share. The problem is that there's X amount of dollars. There's $100. The rich are taking 99 and you're only getting 1. And our job is to make sure that the rich get at least 50%, you get 50, which then still says that like 1% get 50% and the other 99 get the other 50. Seems a bit off to me, but okay, I'm no mathematician. But here's my point. They don't say where the $100 came from. See, what they won't say is the country has X trillion dollars that they spend each year, and you need to get your fair share. But what they won't say is, but we got it from killing the Palestinians and killing these groups, overthrowing this country, assassinating the leader of an African country, overthrowing Bolivia, stealing their or whatever, Costa Rica, taking their bananas. It's like they'll say, you need to get your fair share. But that's like you and I robbing a bank, or me robbing a bank, and you just saying, I'm going to pretend, who cares where the money came from, Garland? How much you got? I got $100,000. I want 50. But you're ignoring that it's stolen money. And so their job is to really, to me, give validation to the system by ignoring the international thievery and crime and just saying, however they get it, let's ignore that. But as long as you get your fair share, which you still ain't even going to get your fair share of the loot. But as long as you get your fair share of the criminally ill-gotten gains, keep your mouth shut. But you still ain't even going to get your fair share of that. But you get my point.
Totally. You're totally right, Garland. And, I know we've talked about this before, so apologies to those who feel like it's just an endless repetition. But I think these things bear repetition for the simple reason that until we really get it, we're not going to understand how we've got to behave. Now, the reality is that this system, when you live in an imperialist country, your privileged conditions of life are entirely paid for by plundering the rest of the world. And the genocide you've been watching in live time on your phone, that's what that looks like. That is not an anomaly. That is what has been going on for hundreds of years by colonialists and imperialists to loot the wealth and control the people of the rest of the world and keep that loot flowing over here. And it was at the turn of the 20th century, so 1900 and the early period there, the ruling class basically realized the importance of making sure that at least a section of their own workers was bribed into loyalty to the system. They need social peace at home so that they're able to do their plunder abroad. They can't cope with doing both, of keeping the workers controlled over here and waging all those wars abroad. Like it's kind of impossible. You need social peace at home to go off and do all those things and to have all the, the cannon fodder and the people doing their various roles in that criminal enterprise, as we've seen with the genocide, right? Look how many people on British soil are implicated, I knew I got the word wrong, are implicated in these crimes, directly implicated, not implicated in the general sense, as we all are, of like our ruling class, our nation is backing this and even organizing and overseeing it to the hilt, was the architect of all of this, in fact, criminality and horrific scenes that we're seeing and crimes that are going on. So we have this general responsibility, we have historic responsibility as Britons, but many workers in our country are directly complicit in these crimes on a daily basis, are helping to produce material that's going straight over to a battlefield, not a battlefield, to a bomber to be dropped on, civilians, or a round that's going to be fired by someone, by a sniper who's picking off kids who are queuing up for food. I mean, you couldn't get more hideously disgusting than that way of treating people, could you? And there are people in our countries directly complicit in that. And what do we get from our trade unions? We get, oh, well, arms jobs are very important. You're absolutely right. The ruling class has understood in the imperialist countries the importance of bribing off at least a section. And for a while after World War II, it was almost the entire working class was receiving quite hefty bribes. And that is why we have this idea that we're somehow superior and there's something better about our way of life, because we've been paid to look the other way and not ask where our better life was coming from. Now people are upset it's going, but a lot of people, their demand is still bring back this golden age, and don't think about what was it resting in, what was it based on. In fact, the demand is unfulfillable because of the imperialist economic crisis right now. They can't afford to pay that kind of a bribe to people. If they could, they would be doing it. I was in Holland for the Nato summit. Holland's a much smaller country, but it's an important cog in the imperialist machine. Their bribe is much more intact than ours. But in Britain, in France, in Germany, and of course in the USA, where the population is much bigger, the ruling exploiting class simply, not because they don't have money, but because of the need to generate profit from everything, and they've got so much capital that reinvesting it at a profit means really rinsing everything and everyone. Paying a big bribe to the whole of a big population has simply become uneconomical for the system in the crisis that it's in. So they can't meet these social democratic demands anymore of give us back our bribe, give us back our share of your loot. No, you're not going to have it. You're going to have austerity. You're going to have repression if you fight back. You're going to have more war spending, and more ways the ruling class is going to be looking for to suck wealth out of you and your state machinery to subsidize their difficulty in making more profit. That's what they're in, a massive crisis because of how hard it is for them to make profits on all of their capital, which they've accumulated so much of the world's wealth in so few places, right? It's very, very hard to keep investing that at a profit. And this drive to war is about that too. And we have to start understanding that there's no way out of this conundrum. There's no way out of this. There's no untying this Gordian knot. It's got to be cut. The knot has to be cut. It can't be untied. There's no way within the system to solve these problems. And we have to start understanding that we can't be begging our rulers for crumbs and promising to look the other way while they loot the world and oppress the world's people and vilify the people they're targeting with the most racist and horrific propaganda to justify the terrible crimes they want to commit against them in order to loot their resources and destroy their countries. We have to recognize that the people our ruling classes are targeting are on the same side as us. They have the same interests as us in getting rid of the system and the ruling class that benefits from the system that is immiserating, attacking and waging war on us all. The war takes different forms. In the imperialist countries right now, the war is austerity and terrible pay and conditions and impoverishment. It's the poverty crisis. It's a homelessness crisis. It's an employment crisis. It's a hunger crisis, and it's the destruction of jobs and infrastructure and the death of a future for so many of our children, right? Is utter immiseration, and it's also direct repression of those people who try to organize and fight back, and especially those people who try to stop the war machine, which tells you what imperialism's real priorities are. And abroad, of course, it's what we see. It's what we see on our phones. It's the wiping out of Ukraine's population as cannon fodder to try to destroy Russia. It is the wiping out of Gaza's population as just collateral damage in the desire to save Israel from, 100 years of pent-up national liberation struggle in the Middle East. It's, this is what imperialism is. There is no nice version. We have to understand that we have a common enemy and work together. If we stand together, if we organize, everything is on our side. The ruling class is actually very small in number. It seems so powerful because we've allowed its big machinery of state violence and of media kind of mind control to overwhelm us and make us feel small. As individuals, of course, we are small and weak and powerless. But together, we have the capability to do everything and anything to change the system, to remove the ruling class, to dispossess them of their huge piles of capital, and to rebuild society in our own interests. We can do all those things. It's been done before, it can be done again. But we have to understand that we can do it. And we also have to recognize that the ruling class is not nearly as powerful as it wants us to believe. A whole lot of what goes on is mind games. If you look at the way they wage wars, a whole lot of it is done with psychological operations to try to terrify the other side into thinking that they better just give in now because they can't stand up against what we're about to unleash on you. But if you stand up to that first wave of kind of terrifying propaganda and they throw everything they've got at you, if you can look at Iran recently, if you can stand up against that first wave of terrorism and psychological warfare, you'll find that what the imperialists said they were going to do to you is not nearly as terrifying as you thought it was going to be. It doesn't match reality. right? That what they really do doesn't deliver on those overwhelming promises they make. And you see, you sort of come back to the whole kind of Trumpian politics, is this sideshow, but he's a kind of weird sideshow, isn't he? Because he's also like a psychological operation. You know, the way he rants and raves, he very much plays his part in this media circus, this propaganda, psychological warfare of like, if we really come for you, boy, you're going to regret it. There'll be nothing left of your country. We're going to obliterate you. But then there's this sort of weird thing where he's trying to keep his own audience believing, the people of the USA believing that the USA is actually delivering on those hyped up promises. And of course, they're not really delivering on those hyped up promises. So he ends up, for anyone who's actually paying attention, he ends up looking utterly bizarre. Now, presumably there's a bunch of people who are not plugged into real international news and who really do believe when he comes back and goes, we destroyed Iran's nuclear, we just decapitated them, we've got total victory, our boys had, dominance of the skies and we won everything and well done, our, total victory, now that's over now. And presumably there are some people on whom that works because they're not looking elsewhere for verification of this information. But for those people who see that at the same time as they see what actually happened, it makes him look utterly bizarre, and it exposes more and more the fake nature of the presidency, doesn't it? It's just hammered home to you every day. This guy's not in charge. This guy's a clown. This guy is a circus act. It's obvious, isn't it? He can't be. He can't possibly be. Look at the utter ridiculousness of the things he says and does and the promises he makes. And, I'll just end on this, Garland. I know we're going over time, but to see, you don't know whether to laugh or cry, do you? To see the genocidaire in chief offering the warmonger in chief the Nobel Peace Prize, or, giving him his nomination. And it's just every year we come up with a new reason why we say irony is dead, don't we? Okay, and every year the kind of cognitive dissonance and the insanity of the bourgeois political circus becomes more insane. And I have to say that for me is one of the many signs of the utter decay and bankruptcy of the system. This is not the sign of a strong, healthy, vigorous, optimistic, powerful ruling class. These are signs of a ruling class that's hanging on by a thread, by its fingernails, and it's just trying to throw enough dust in our eyes that we don't realize that it is on the edge of a precipice. They don't want us to realize that their whole system is teetering on the brink of a massive, massive economic meltdown. Hardly anybody talks about that. That's the real underpinning of all of this desperation to go to war and control. And, got to get rid of Iran. We've got to get rid of Russia. We've got to get rid of China. They need to try and bring back profitability and demand into their flagging system. And if they don't, they're in such deep trouble. And they're trying to just distract us from understanding any of that with all of this crazy social media and, news cycle circus, and hoping that they'll keep us busy enough and distracted enough. And that brings us back to, the question of these new parties. Keep us distracted in all these different ways from realizing that the problem is the system.
Do you have time for one question about Iran?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
You do.
It's interesting. I'm listening to you talk about the ruling elite say, they try to make everybody think they're powerful, but they're not really powerful. They try to scare us. Okay. What does Israel do? We're the most powerful army, the most moral army, but we can dominate the region. We can dominate everybody, right? And then they come out and they do the shock and awe thing against Iran. Oh, we're going to do some kind of inside operation, throw drones around, try to do some assassinations. And of course, the Iranians will just fall and drop to their knees and say, please, please, take over our country and steal all of our stuff. Well, they got a punch in, and then the Iranians beat the crap out of them. I mean, they're hiding. Like, what happened was it got revealed how weak they really are. They're like, we're going to get the Iranians, and they got in a punch, and the Iranians took a punch, fair enough. And then now they have to hide the destruction in Israel. They can't show the bases. They can't show, and every now and then pictures will come out where somebody will sneak out the pictures and people go, holy moly, this looks like they've turned your country to rubble. I think the conversation between Netanyahu and Trump was far different than people think it was. People are like, oh, yes, Israel can't wait to attack them again. The truth is, Israel couldn't attack anybody right. Israel has been crushed. They couldn't take 12 days. They couldn't take another 12 days of that. There'd be nothing left. But I think right now, regarding Iran, the empire is in a mess. They don't know what to do. Of course, they want to attack them and take all of their stuff. But if they attack them, then Israel gets exposed again and flattened. The U.S. is running out of everything. I think they had all kinds of plans of all these devious deeds they were going to do. And I think, they got a punch in the nose by Iran. I think their plans are in flux, that right now they're trying to figure out how to handle Iran, that everybody's saying, well, they're going to do this, they're going to do that next. I don't think they know what to do, because I think that punch in the nose that they weren't prepared has kind of thrown them off kilter.
I think you're right, Garland. Just to be clear what I'm saying about imperialism, I'm not saying that it's not powerful. It's hugely powerful. What I'm saying is it's not as powerful as it used to be, and it's not as powerful as it pretends to be. It's not all powerful. It's not unbeatable. It's not unbeatable in symmetric warfare. It's not unbeatable in asymmetric warfare. Interestingly, increasingly, it's turning to asymmetric methods where it tries to be like the little power. It tries to use asymmetric methods against Russia and China because it can't go up against them mano a mano, as they say. Right?
The weak side always uses terrorism. Everybody knows that about a conflict. The weak side, if two people are fighting, two tough guys, we're going to fight. They'll put up their fists and they'll go at it. If one little guy, he'll say to the other guy, look over there. When the guy looks over there, he'll punch him in the head. He has no choice. Otherwise, he's going to be beaten. As soon as they went to terrorism, it was an admission. We're weak now. We can't fight these people straight up. Anyway, continue.
But I think it's really interesting when you look at what happened in Iran in those days, because as the dust settles, what other things we're seeing? That the West, and by that I mean basically CIA and MI6, led a very carefully orchestrated regime change operation, which really relied on the Iranian society being confused and overwhelmed in the first 24 hours. And they activated a whole load of sleeper cells and plans and operations that had taken many, many years in the planning and can't just be repeated like that. For a start, they've been exposed that this was going on, that they had all these agents there, that they basically bribed, like they do everywhere. They bribed the most poor, desperate people they could find, which in this case, a lot of them were Afghan refugees. But in general, they look for people who are disaffected, poor, having a bad time in somewhere or another, and they bribe them and they turn them into their agents and their sleepers. So they've activated that. So now, of course, Iranian society is totally vigilant to that. The secret services are following up and they're finding all the networks, the police, the population generally is looking around, alert. They did a massive psychological operation. Promising the Iranian people terrible, terrible things if they didn't just capitulate straight away. And they believed their own press, just like when they attacked Russia through Ukraine, they believed their own press. This country is basically, oil where with the flag type vibe, that all the work they've been doing for decades, particularly through the media. I don't think a lot of people understand. Mohammed Marandi, Professor Marandi, you will have talked to him and you'll have seen him on the internet, but a lot of people who don't hear him speaking may not realize that the huge Western propaganda operation in Iran, like thousands of channels, on the internet, on radio, on television, in print, in Farsi, directed at the Iranian population and the young people in particular, to make them feel that the reason things are difficult in their country. Now, remember, the difficulties stem from sanctions put on their country to strangle it and make it difficult for Iran to develop and become a strong economy and therefore deliver a good life to its people. So that means their progress is slower than it would be. And that means they have to struggle for every advance. And that's hard work for the people. And over decades, it gets harder. And the younger people who didn't fight in the revolution and don't understand what the revolution represents, they're an easier target for these media outlets to say to people, oh, the reason that things are hard for you is because your government is just a bit too hardline. And if they would just play ball with the West, everything would be, all these restrictions would be lifted and your life would be better. They've done all of this trying to chip away. And they had told themselves that they've been really successful with that. Now, we saw, didn't we, suddenly this, they got this Shah in waiting. Who knew? Who knew that MI6 had been sitting on the Shah in waiting all this time? It shouldn't surprise us. Just like the CIA is sitting on the Dalai Lama in India and paying him a few $100,000, probably by now with inflation it's $1 million a year, I don't know, but he gets a hefty sub for sitting, him and a bunch of acolytes in the Indian Himalayas somewhere on ice, just like they paid a bunch of Ukrainian and Lithuanian and Latvian, and Polish fascists for years on ice. They keep them on ice for just in case we get the chance to try to bring you back. Suddenly, in the midst of all this, up pops the Shah in waiting, doing meetings in the British House of Commons where his, MI6 sponsors are putting him forwards and saying, this guy is the leader of Iran's vibrant democracy movement. Democracy, I mean, you couldn't make it up, could you? This king of kings, this absolute monarch in waiting is the head of a vibrant democracy movement, because what Iran's really suffering from since they got rid of absolute monarchy is a lack of democracy. This is their narrative. They expect us to be idiots and not ever verify anything for ourselves. Because you can find out, about the Shah, and you can find out about Mossadegh, and you can find out about British involvement in Iran for the last 100 years, if you go and have a look for it. But the media, obviously mainstream media, aren't telling you. Mainstream politicians, mainstream media, they all give you the same crap. The problem for Iran is not our animosity, it's not our strangling of Iran, it's not us putting Israel just down the road that's constantly attacking it, trying to infiltrate it with spies, trying to bring it down in various ways. No, the problem is that they don't have enough democracy because they had a revolution that was somehow very undemocratic when the people made up their own minds about their own destiny. That was anti-democracy. So they had a massive regime change plan, and it involved sleeper cells. I mean, what it turns out, so you see the extent of the psychological operation when you find out that a lot of what was portrayed in Western media as missile strikes from Israel, quite a lot of those turned out to be sleepers within the country, just doing things like setting tires on fire or doing a car bomb and filming it and putting on social media. Look, here's a thing burning. Iran is burning. And then that's the headline, right? Iran is burning, panic everywhere. Everybody, then the Shah's out going, yes, vibrant democracy movement. And now they've put him away again until the next time he's needed. But what happened? Because Iran didn't break, I also heard, I don't know if this is true information, I heard from somebody, I can't even remember who, so sorry, I can't tell you my source, that there had been an attempt to jam all of Iranian communication signals, which would also have, so as well as doing this assassination attempt to try and decapitate the major leadership, from what I hear, the Ayatollah himself was a target. They just couldn't find him. So they were unsuccessful in murdering the Ayatollah. They were successful in murdering a whole load of generals. They were successful in murdering a whole load of nuclear scientists. They were not successful in maintaining a jam on the communication systems of the country, which was part of the plan of just causing chaos and confusion in Iran while they overwhelmed the people with propaganda that says, oh my God, everything's fallen apart and your country sold you out and it's dying and you better just give up. But it was that they activated all of these different plans that they'd had going on: terrorism, assassination, sleeper cells, the whole psychological operation. Here's the new Shah, massive publicity campaign in the West to tell people that, this was a necessary action. Remember that just a few days before this was going on, all the politicians and media in the West had been forced to start talking about the genocide and the fact that it might be a problem. It took them 19 months to do it, and they suddenly started doing it. And yet, when Israel launched an unprovoked illegal act of war against Iran, which is the highest crime against humanity, they all sang in chorus that Israel was saving democracy and the West and civilization, and even saving the Iranians by bombing them because, the mad mullahs can't be allowed to have a bomb. We won't go into the nuclear question again here. We talked about it last time, I think. But Iran did not fall to this operation. Everything about this operation says it was supposed to succeed within 24, 48 hours. Iran withstood. As you said, it took a punch. And it was a big punch. It was not a small punch. It was a big punch. But they rolled with the punch. They got themselves back up. They were reorganized. They unjammed their systems much more quickly than was expected. It's possible they had some help from one of their allies with that. And then what happened? What we saw was massive boomerangs on the regime changes. Number one, they're exposed once again as regime changers. They're exposed once again as non-negotiable with. What is it? Non-agreement capable. Isn't that what Putin's phrase, right? President Putin of Russia said that about the of Russia. Well, once again, Iran has paid the price in blood to prove to itself and to everyone else around the world that no amount of negotiating and taking the West and specifically the US imperialism, British imperialists at their word will get you a peaceful outcome. All they're trying to do, what's it you always say? Nice doggy, hit you with a rock, right? All they're trying to do is find the right opportunity to crush you. And if the imperialist aim is to crush you, that is their aim, and it doesn't change no matter what form your relationship is currently taking. Your form might be taking trade relationship, or it might be taking sanctions. It might be diplomacy, or it might be war. But their aim is always the same aim, and you have to recognize that if you're going to defend yourself, right? So but the boomerang was we saw Iranian unity, a whole load of people who are not necessarily happy with the government, not necessarily happy with the whole setup of aspects of what's going on in Iran. Were like, no, we stand as Iranians. We will not give in to this type of thing. We will not back the West's regime change plan. We will rally around the government. So massive fail there. The IAEA, massively exposed. Yet another institution, international so-called institution, being exposed as a tool of imperialist policy, riddled with spies. Basically, we found out, didn't we, that the names, locations, and details of Iranian nuclear scientists had been given to Mossad by the IAEA. So the IAEA is now kicked out. Iran now has absolute legitimacy in the eyes of any thinking person in the world. Number one, to continue with its peaceful nuclear program. Number two, to get out of the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. Number three, to develop a nuclear deterrent, which is clearly the only thing that might make the Israelis think twice about trying to bomb them. And the Israelis obviously being front people for the British and the Americans. Just have to remind everybody that it's not that the Israelis go mad. Clearly, if Israel is doing this, it's because the imperialists are desperate. But I think you're right, Garland, that the imperialists were knocked off their balance, having to launch this at this moment anyway. But I think because they had had success in Syria, finally, they had success in Syria, and they'd always said Syria was a stepping stone to Iran. They felt like, well, we're not really quite in the perfect conditions for go, but we've knocked out Syria, so Iran is vulnerable, and we've got all these sleeper things, and actually there's a load of dissent in Iran, and we can light it off with a touch paper, and the country will fall apart, and we'll be able to install a stooge regime. It didn't go the way that they thought. But the other thing, of course, is the boomerang on Israeli society has been tremendous. I know there's a lot of people who have, so genocide weary, they would have liked the war to carry on and more devastation to be inflicted on Israel. But Iran has to think in a very long-term way, and we are not able to understand all the parameters under which they are acting. They have to take a long-term view, and we have to remember that time is on the side of the axis of resistance. Time is not on the side of the imperialists. For them, it's the short, sharp shock is going to allow them to carry the day. And if they're forced into a position of long-term attrition, they will fall apart first. They do not have right on their side. They don't even have economics on their side. They don't have military technology on their side for long-term attritive warfare. So, the Iranians, like the Russians in Ukraine, are not stupid, that they take their time and are very, very calibrated. And one of the things about their very calibrated responses is that it carries global opinion with it. Now, global, obviously, I have to discount the Western media bubble, because you can't carry that with you. That's a psychological operation on us that we just have to recognize and get out from under. But global public opinion is with Iran. And the fact that, and just like with Russia and Ukraine, that they've been so calibrated in their responses, and it was very tit for tat. You destroy a scientific institution, we'll destroy a scientific institution. You destroy a military base, we'll destroy, so they airfield and, but huge devastation that they wreaked, nevertheless, on Israel, on the Zionist colony, of a type that the Israelis have never had to suffer before. They've been imbibing this bullshit Kool-Aid that they're the chosen people, and that they are, they've got Uncle Sam behind them, and his military is unstoppable and unfaceable, and they've got dominance of the skies, and they've got dominance of everything. And therefore, if they come for anybody, those people are going to be flattened. And on that basis, their story they tell themselves about being God's chosen people can feel like it must be true, right? Nobody can fight these bloody Arabs. What have they just got? Flip-flops and stones and a couple of machine guns, and we've got F-16s and Uncle Sam behind us and endless money and endless weapons, and no one can stand up to us, right? But it turns out that it's not true. Things have changed. And the reality is, Iran made it clear that it could have carried on and Israel would have ceased to exist. It didn't do that. It stopped when the Zionists begged for a ceasefire, and now they will be regrouping. But the war is not by any means over. The imperialists haven't lost their need to destroy Iran, just as they haven't lost their need to destroy Russia and China. Iran knows full well that it's going to come back, and it will simply prepare itself. It has to play, as I said, a long-term game. It genuinely has the interests of its people to heart. The West treats people like cannon fodder and collateral damage and doesn't care how many of them die. But if you're a patriotic government trying to take care of the sovereignty of your people, you're also trying to take care of their lives. You're trying to find a way through this situation that minimizes the loss of life on your side. And it's a very, very, very difficult balance. It's a hard job. It's a big responsibility. So we have to be careful when we're on the sidelines going, oh, we just want, you can see people have a bit of a bloodlust up sometimes. And it's not surprising when you see the crimes that Israel has committed. But, we have got to think long term. When you look at the long-term picture, I think what we're seeing is that the IDF, the Israeli so-called defense force, which is actually the Israeli occupation/offense force, has been exposed as very weak, in fact, militarily, and unable to continue without constant support and propping up from Western forces. And Israeli society is in a social, military, economic meltdown. And that is only going to continue. And I genuinely believe, I've been saying this since the 7th of October, Garland, I think something now has finally shifted in the Middle East. We are looking at a process, and I don't know how long it will take. It's clearly, I agree with Laith Marouf, we're in for a long war. But I believe that a process has begun that is not going to end until not only the settler colony, the Zionist state, is gone and dismantled, but all imperialist occupation and control of the resources, the territories, the governments, and the bases of the Middle East is also kicked out. I think that's the path we're on. It's a very long, difficult, slow process, but it's something that we workers in Britain and the USA must recognize that we're totally invested in. The reason being what we talked about earlier. It's the imperialist ability to control the vast oil wealth of the Middle East is part of what makes them so strong that they can destroy our lives at home and get away with it. If they get weaker, if they have losses abroad, they become weaker. They're an enemy that we're much more able to also defeat at home. And so vice versa. We can help speed up the victory of the peoples of the Middle East if we do our part at home. And that means we've got to organize to stop the war machine in its tracks from its root. We can stop it from here. We don't have to wait for the people of the Middle East to liberate us. We can play our part in this joint struggle to win liberation. You know, the system is strong, it's violent, it's vicious, but it can't fight us all at the same time. And the more of us are fighting and the more active fronts they have to deal with, the more likely it is that they're going to collapse and fall, and we are going to be able to finally get the future that we really long for.
I agree with you 100%. And I think the beginning of the end, or maybe even the end of the beginning, was when they took a punch at Iran, because Israel still had some level of dominance, you know, that they could argue. And once they took a punch at Iran, and Iran smacked them down with ease, Iran didn't fight. Iran made it clear to, as some would say, to the organ grinder, we're not afraid of your monkey. We'll smack your monkey around a little bit. Whap. Now, we've been waiting for you all along. So they said to the U.S., we're not worried about Israel's small potatoes. We can take care of them. We're preparing for a fight with you because we know that you're coming. And anybody can look at that and say Israel was no match for them, and they had to tap out. At that point, it's over. The whole game is over. They're not scaring people in the Middle East anymore. They're not scaring anybody in the Middle East. As long as they didn't try to do that, they could make an argument. Now that they've tried and failed, you're right. The whole thing has to fall apart, because the only thing they had was the fear. You know, the only thing they had was the mind of the slave who said, I'll accept slavery. Now that the whole Middle East is like, you're not as tough as we think you are, it's over for them. It's just a matter of when. So I'm with you. Joti Brar, tell everybody where they can find you online. And thank you for staying an extra amount of time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, I hope it was interesting for the poor viewers. If you go to Telegram, you'll see a channel with my name, Joti Brar, and also with my party's name, The Communists. You can see our website address there, thecommunists.org. Please go and sign up for our newsletters, and also sign up for a subscription to our newspapers. They're really worth having in your hands. It's a very different experience. We have on our website also a Marxist education program that you can find by looking at the menu there. Again, really important for people who recognize that the world has to change, that we start to take responsibility for changing it and not just sit at home waiting for the ruling class to deliver us a new savior. We are the saviors. We have the power. We have the science available to us to understand, you know, how to solve humanity's problems, and it involves some study. Unfortunately, there's no way around it. You're going to have to learn something and get organized and help the rest of the working class understand that this is what we need. So, you know, I do encourage people to find our stuff there. And if you want a kind of relatively easier introduction, go to our YouTube channel, Proletarian TV. There's lots and lots of presentations there on all kinds of topics to do with Marxism and imperialism and how to organize to change the world.
Thank you very much. Everybody, make sure you share this on all your social media platforms. Joti has given you all of the information if you want to go there and check out all of the good work they're doing and see what they're up to. Follow me on Rockfin and Rumble and Telegram and all that kind of stuff. If you want to donate, you see all the donate stuff there. But even if you can't, the most important thing you can do is share this on all your social media platforms and understand that there's a lot of good work being done on the alternatives media sphere. And if you see something and you're like, I really like that, I think that's good, share that on your social media platform. We got to pull people away from the mainstream media. Well, no, we actually don't, because they're voluntarily leaving. But everybody, keep up the good work. And most importantly, as I said, share this on all your social media platforms. We're out.